Welcome back to another episode of Native Drums, where we center the rhythm of our roots, the beat of our blackness, and the sacred pulse of our prophetic tradition. I'm Napoleon Bradford, and today we're shifting our conversation. Last week we talked about the good of God talk, the necessity of lived experiences to be transformed and translated through our common everyday conversation as a means of challenging the colonized and constricting conditions we find ourselves in as Black people. But today, we're going to shift to another level, not just God talk, but the good of our God walk. This episode isn't just about God talk, the hollowness of conversation. It's about good God walk, a lived theology of leadership for the wounded healer, the shepherd prophet, the pastor called to serve not just the pulpits, but the people. This is a two-part series. Today's focus is on the leader and the necessity of strong pastoral leadership that is led by God and called by God to do the work of God. Next week, we'll talk about godly fellowship, right? Because leaders without followers are just simply taking a walk. But we need people that are empowered by the leader's talk, by the God talk of the leader, to do the God work in the world. We're digging into the lived tension and sacred responsibility of leading with love, leading with justice, and leading from the margins. Too often, the church has been loud in spirit, but silent in systems. We've shouted about heaven while people around us were living through hell. Dr. James Henry Harris posits that historically evangelistic fervor by preachers and laypersons, Black and white, has not altered the social structure in a manner that favors the poor and oppressed. He argues that the church has often played an indecisive and passive role in changing the status quo from slavery to civil rights. This suggests that pastoral leadership has been ineffective in driving the necessary changes for the marginalized. However, Harris contends that this should not be the stance of the church. He states the church needs to radicalize its perspective regarding its role as an institution and begin to understand its strength in order to change the nature of urban America. The church has a responsibility to its constituents and to the larger society to help transform our society into one where liberation and justice will be realized in our lifetime. The question then is, how has the church and its pastors strayed from their clear biblical mandate for justice and care of the oppressed? The Old Testament presents a foundational example of pastoral leadership in the calling of Moses. God commissions Moses from the burning bush, ordaining him to lead his people from the oppression to the promised land. In Exodus 3:7 through 10, it states, "Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I've heard their cry because of their oppression and their taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I've come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians. And now, behold, the cry of the people Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." This divine assignment emphasizes the pastor's role to lead, protect, and prophetically challenge systemic injustices. Moses further reinforces this role in Deuteronomy 20:2-4, where he instructs the people before battle, when you draw near to battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people and say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you the victory. In this passage, the expected role of the pastor is to provide comfort and support amid challenges, reminding the people of God's ever-present power to ensure deliverance. So the question becomes, are we seeing pastors that are, one, aware of the challenges, two, astute enough to articulate the real time issues, and three, ready to activate and encourage the people to step out and stand against the empire and the challenges that are leading to the oppression of the same people? James Cone, we talked about him last week, articulates that the gospel of Jesus is not a rational concept to be explained in the theory of salvation, but a story about God's presence in Jesus's solidarity with the oppressed, which led to his death on the cross. What is redemptive is the faith that God snatches victory out of defeat, life out of death, and hope out of despair. This perspective underscores the necessity for pastors to embody the teachings of Jesus, which emphasizes liberation and justice. In Luke 4, Jesus enters the synagogue and reads from Isaiah, declaring, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. This declaration indicates that these acts of liberation should be central to the church's mission and the pastor's practices. To push it further, Luke 4:21 says Jesus hands the scrolls back to the priests and closes them and says, Today, this day, this scripture is being fulfilled in your hearing. In other words, pastors must move from reading about the book and reading and preaching from the book to actually becoming the book. Additionally, in Matthew 25, Jesus articulates the criteria for membership among his followers, emphasizing acts of service. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me in. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. This passage reinforces the effect that effective ministry must include these deliberate and intentional acts of compassion and justice. Roxburgh and Boren in 2009 assert a missional imagination is not about the church. It's not about how to make the church better, how to get more people to come to church, or how to turn a dying church around. It's about getting the church back to cultural respectability in a time when it is marginalized. Instead, the church is to be God's hands and feet in accomplishing God's mission. This perspective emphasizes that pastoral leadership and theology must be rooted in Jesus's demonstrations rather than confined to human expectations. Harris further notes, the church has appeared to be tepid on issues of liberation by separating the liberation motif from the essence of evangelism. However, true evangelical Christianity is liberative and transformative. The Black pastoral voice emerged during the Middle Passage. Hines, in his book 2024, notes, despite the dehumanizing conditions of the slave ship, Many of the captives remained committed to a sense of community and unbreakable oneness, despite their differences. Multiple tribes, multiple countries in the same ship, but they were all committed. There were countless times, however, when the ability to maintain this sense of oneness was threatened by the delirious conditions of the slave ship. And it was during such times that a supernatural word, an extraordinary utterance was needed to provide comfort, hope, and liberation to the slave ship community. In the face of oppression, the enslaved individuals found solace in their shared faith, with pastoral voices emerging to instill hope. Hines refers to Daniel Black's novel, The Coming, which vividly depicts the slaves' community relentless search for spiritual strength despite their dire circumstances. Black illustrates this resilience in saying, "A woman from our villages bellowed, 'We shall not all die. We shall live again. We shall prosper and teach the souls of men the ways of God.'" This underscores the vital role of the Black pastor as a beacon of hope, proclaiming that trouble won't last always. That's the heartbeat of good God walk. It doesn't just worship on Sunday, it works on Monday. It doesn't just sing spirituals, it builds systems. It doesn't just shout about change, it walks into it. At the heart of effective pastoral care, lies a deep engagement with biblical teachings which illuminate the principles of justice, compassion, and community while providing a transformative framework for ministry within the Black church. A harsh reality is captured by Mumford in 2024, who notes in some congregations, people with mental illnesses, and dare the researchers say any type of illness or unwellness, are likened to the Gennesaret man possessed by demons in the gospel. In this text, a man who is possessed by demons spends his days and nights howling and injuring himself with stones. However, when he has an encounter with Jesus, his destiny changes. This striking fact is that everyone who knew the man could only see the problem, but it was Jesus who first saw him as person. Pastoral care and leadership must be driven by a theology that acknowledges the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their status, gender, identification, social economic condition, or mental health. Cohn, in 2015, articulates this perspective when he states, Paul Tillich expressed this paradox in his analysis of the relationship between being and non-being. On the one hand, being is the opposite of non-being. The human person, therefore, is a creature who seeks to be in spite of non-being. This illustrates the danger of writing off individuals based on their conditions of suffering and perceived non-being. Tillich, in 1952, further explains the courage to be is the ethical act in which man affirms his being in spite of those elements of his existence which conflict with essential self-affirmation. It took great courage for the man in the tombs to approach Jesus and seek restoration, an act that required substantial effort to be seen and recognized. In Mark 5, 1-2, we read, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes, and when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit. The language used here is important. The narrator describes the man initially as a man with an unclean spirit, emphasizing his humanity before detailing his struggles. Despite the description in verses 3 through 5, who had his dwelling among the tombs, nobody could bind him, not even with chains. Jesus saw him first as a person in need of compassion and healing. This model of pastoral care demonstrates that Jesus, as the ultimate pastor, heard the cries of the man and responded with empathy. Hopkins in 2000 states, in addition, God is a just and holy being whose justice is the partiality to the groans of those who are heavy laden with unjust oppression. The justice of I am becomes known or appears only in relation to the lack of justice expressed in the cries of the downtrodden and the brokenhearted. Here, Hopkins emphasizes that God responds to the cries of the oppressed, and it is through these cries that God is moved to engage. This motif is echoed in Exodus 2:23, which recounts how the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cries for rescue prompted God to commission Moses, as seen in Exodus 3:7 and 8. I've seen the affliction. I've heard their cries. The pastor must embody this listening posture, attending to the needs and suffering of their congregation. That's our first assignment as pastors: to see, to hear, and to act. Pastoral theology and leadership, then, is not merely intellectual, it's incarnational. It steps into the story. James Cone reminds us that the gospel of Jesus is not a rational concept, but a story of God's presence in Jesus's solidarity with the oppressed. If your theology doesn't stand in solidarity with the wounded, it doesn't walk with God. The good God walk starts in the valley, not just in the sanctuary. Henry Nouwen poignantly asserts, for the minister is called to recognize the suffering of his time in his own heart and make that recognition the starting point of his service. Whether he tries to enter into the dislocated world, relate to the convulsive generation, or speak to the dying man, his service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from the heart of from a heart wounded by the suffering about which he speaks. This echoes the divine response seen in the story of Moses, where God's awareness of suffering led to action. A pastoral model rooted in the shepherd motif must recognize when pastors see or hear their sheep in pain, they too must feel that hurt before offering help. This empathetic approach is essential in creating an authentic ministry that fosters healing and justice. Y'all with me? Effective pastoral ministry and leadership transcends theoretical frameworks. It demands a bold and intentional application of biblical principles in real life situations where the transformative power of faith meets the urgent needs of community. One of the most prevalent ways this can occur is through addressing trauma. McClintock in 2022 states, trauma can start with one life-threatening incident or can be caused by repeated incidences. Trauma can arise from witnessing violence as well as being a victim of violence. Luckily, as clergy who care for and about others, it's not up to us to diagnose people or label them by their mental health conditions. But the more we learn about trauma's after effects, the better prepared we are to recognize and respond to trauma victims appropriately by avoiding re-injury and facilitating healing. This is called trauma-informed care. As pastoral leaders, the worst thing we can do is inflict the reopening of wounded people. If we are considered a hospital where people come to be triaged and treated, we cannot do that by reopening the wounds and not providing the salvific salve. The researcher can relate to Dr. McClintock's insight as from the perspective of me, right? So in 2016, my 12-year-old daughter was killed in a car accident. And in 2017, due to infidelity, my marriage nearly ended. The lasting impacts of these two events not only changed my life, but also deepened my empathy and intentionality in ministering to those grieving, whether through death or marital challenges. McClintock elaborates trauma-informed clergy learn ways to foster healing and ways to avoid harm. We are open-hearted and open-minded. We recognize the physiological symptoms in people with mental health challenges or difficult personalities and get curious about what trauma lies beneath their individual behavior. We don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We are deliberate in taking time to assess and to care. Pastors must be willing to learn the cues that indicate trauma, enabling them to respond appropriately, especially when dealing with individuals experiencing intersectional trauma arising from various situations converging simultaneously. McClintock suggests that clergy, in order to provide effective pastoral care and leadership, must learn the 4 R's of trauma-informed care. First of all, you got to realize trauma's impact on individuals and groups. Secondly, you got to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma. Thirdly, you got to respond to trauma with supportive services. And fourthly, you got to resist re-traumatization by creating safe, supportive, and collaborative partnerships with victims and survivors. Pastors must be deliberate in ensuring they are equipped to provide the level of care their congregants will need. One of the best ways to combat trauma, according to Bureau, is through the critical need for clinical pastoral education among African American clergy in the age of Black Lives Matter. Coates states, for as long as it has existed, the African American church has been the center of various social and economic movements for liberation and equality within the Black community. However, in recent years, the need for more justice-minded clergy trained to engage social problems have emerged once again. One of the ways this can be achieved is through the educational learning environments found within clinical pastoral education. More importantly, they advocate for an Afrocentric model of pastor education that allows Black pastors to relate well to Black congregations. Hines discusses the difference between pastoral theology of white theologians such as Seward Hiltner and the need for Black congregations. He notes that there are 3 operation-centered aspects of Hiltner's exposition of pastoral theology: healing, sustaining, and guiding, all of which are activities that are carried out by the Christian shepherd. While these aspects may have worked for white parishioners, African American theologians have recognized there is a need for a more relevant approach. Hines continues, African American pastoral theologians argue that this shift was important for their work because of the individualistic focus of normative pastoral theology, particularly the mode espoused by Hiltner's shepherding perspective, and proved insufficient to address the communal needs of the African American context. African American pastoral theologians insist that pastoral theology and leadership must move beyond its focus of the care of the individual via healing, guiding, and sustaining to be attentive to the ways in which race, culture, gender, sexuality, and power impact how effectively care is provided in the African American context. Watkins Ali in 2000 identifies three limitations of Hiltner's approach. Number one, it overvalues the pastor's perspective. Number two, it is individualistic and focused on European cultural thought. And three, it ignores the cultural experiences of African Americans. There must be more to what is needed for Black pastoral care that focuses specifically on Black people. Watkins Ali suggests the intent of care must also be nurturing, empowering, and liberating if African Americans collectively are to survive the harshness of their external realities. We got to do more than just guide. We got to nurture. We have to empower, and we have to liberate. The Black community is not based on individualism. It tends to be more communal, necessitating a holistic model of pastoral care. Wimberly emphasizes the Black churches must revisit the concept of the village, noting the village that used to characterize the African American community has collapsed. This dissolution of the village has led to the loss of communal support, leaving Black individuals, parishioners, and pastors feeling as though they're either fighting against each other or battling internal struggles, ultimately resulting in community loss. Wimberly introduces the concept of revillaging, defining it as the village is that small communal network of people linked together by a common biological family and cultural heritage, living in a particular geographical location where frequent interactions is a reality. Our communities are the village. Our neighborhoods, our church congregations are the village. And we must work extremely hard as pastoral leaders to ensure that the community stays together. The Black pastoral care must re-engage the communal nature of Black people. Hines states, theologically, Wimberly grounds revillaging in an African American pastoral theological approach that utilizes narrative therapy to help parishioners understand how God is working in their lives. It's the image of the testimony service. We've gotten away from testimony service, but testimony service was an amazing time where the community came together and publicly shared how God has shown up in their life. It's through their stories that other people watching and listening are able to hear how God showed up for others and then recognize how God has shown up for them. Right? Look at me. I'm a testimony. I didn't make it on my own. I'm not standing here alone. It was Jesus who gave me this opportunity. Look at me. I'm a testimony. Thomas in 2019 suggests mindfulness as a pastoral response to health education and violence in the Black community. Mindfulness means paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in present moment, non-judgmentally. This kind of attention nurtures greater awareness, clarity, and acceptance of the present moment reality. Black pastors must not only confront the rejection of ideas like intersectionality, but also face trauma and violence, recognizing that mindfulness may assist them in their presence and participation with the congregants. In a society where systemic injustice continues to inflict pain and suffering on Black communities, the Black church emerges as a source of strength, resilience, and hope. Grounded in the principles of Black liberation theology, the church is called to go beyond traditional worship practices and become a force for radical healing and empowerment. This theological perspective emphasizes that the church must actively confront the injustices that plague its members and the broader society, acknowledging that trauma is often both personal and communal. A comprehensive pastoral ministry framework rooted in Black liberation theology seeks to weave together faith, justice, and community engagement. It invites church leaders to adopt a transformative vision that integrates trauma-informed care with a commitment for social justice. This framework recognizes that the wounds inflicted by systemic oppression are not isolated incidents. Rather, they are interconnected with larger societal issues that demand a bold and compassionate response from the church. By centering the lived experiences of marginalized individuals, this framework aims to foster healing, resilience, while advocating for justice. It challenges pastors to step into the role not only of spiritual guides, but also active agents of change who engage their congregations in the work of liberation. As we delve into the components of this integrated pastoral ministry, we will draw on the insights from influential theologians and scholars who illuminate the path toward a church that embodies the liberating love of Christ in its mission. I want to introduce you to two pastoral frameworks. The first framework is based on chapter 3 of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 work, The Strength to Love. While Dr. King may have not anticipated that his reflection on the Jericho Road would inform best practices for pastoral engagement, this application is essential, especially when combined with the second, which is Carol Watkins Ali's reimagining of Hiltner's shepherd model. King, in 1963, begins his discussion. I would like to talk with you about a good man whose exemplary life will always be a flashing light to plague the dozing conscience of mankind. His goodness was not found in a passive commitment to a particular creed, but in his active participation in a life-saving deed, not in a moral pilgrimage that reached its destination point, but in the love ethics by which he journeyed life's highway. He was good because he was a good neighbor. This introduction not only sets up the story, but also provides the background characteristics for a pastoral framework. The first characteristic King highlights is that a good man, a good pastoral leader's life, serves as a beacon of hope in an oppressive world. Jesus stated in Matthew 5:14-16, "You are the light of the world. A city set on the hill cannot be hidden, nor do the people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Jesus spoke to his disciples, those who would succeed him in kingdom building, reminding them that they are expected to shine as lights. Dr. King emphasized that the first indicator of a godly man, a good man, a pastor, is indeed his light. The second characteristic Dr. King describes is that this good man's goodness comes not from a passive commitment, but in his active participation. King suggests that the Black pastor must be engaged in life-saving work, actively involved in the forefront of such efforts. Harris states, it's in this understanding of God and the world that governs the life and work of the pastor and the parishioner. Being a pastor is a calling. It requires an inordinate amount of love and sacrifice. It's also a constant struggle that involves motivation, change, continuity, teaching, preaching, counseling, managing, and a host of other skills, emotions, and activity. Harris supports King's depiction of a Black pastor, emphasizing that it requires active participation, not in folly, but in life-saving deeds. Jesus himself states in John chapter 9, verses 4 through 5, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Jesus conveys to his disciples before healing a man wrongfully believed to be blind by sin that there is an expectation of pastoral engagement in God's assignment while one is able, for there will come a time when the work cannot be done. McCorn quoted Carol Watkins Ali stating that two active non-negotiables of Black theology led by Black pastors in the Black church are survival and liberation. McCorn notes survival is the ability of the African American to resist systemic oppression and genocide, first, and secondly, to recover the self, which entails a psychological recovery from the abuse and dehumanization of political oppression, exploitation, as well as recovery of African heritage and values that were repressed during slavery. By liberation, I mean total freedom from all kind of oppression for African American descendants of slavery and the ability of African Americans as people to self-determine and engage in the process of transformation of the dominant oppressive culture through political resistance. This is the active work of the Black pastor, life-saving work. Thirdly, King posits that the goodness of the good man, the godly man, the pastor is not due to a moral pilgrimage, but to its love, but in the love ethic by which he journeys life's highway. King asserts that the Black pastor never arrives at a place of piety, but is constantly on a journey that shapes their compassion, deepens their empathy, and enhances their usefulness in engaging the masses. Williams in 2021 states, as I write this book, racism, sexism, homophobia, ageism, ableism, and other isms and phobias plague the planet, supported by individuals and institutions who benefit from the continued maintenance of said isms and phobias. William emphasizes that the preacher prophet must remain connected to the prevailing issues in order to interpret and narrate the times, giving meaning to the milieu in which we find ourselves. This reflects King's imperative regarding the Black preacher, one who is continually journeying along life's highways based on love ethics. Williams emphasizes that this journey is essential. Fluker states that the failure rests on the struggle for recognition, the inordinate need to be honored and respected, the need to stand out as a symbol of prowess and power, to demand by height what one fails to achieve by depth, to wrest from what from the other what one thinks is absent in oneself, and to find security in the obsequious and submission of others. Fluker critiques highlights the opposite of the love ethic that King describes as foundational for the good, the godly man, and the black pastor. If pastors become consumed with their desire for greatness, they will lose sight of their effectiveness in serving the people. King continues, what constituted the goodness of the Good Samaritan? Why will he always be an inspiring paragon for neighborly virtue? It seems to me that this man's goodness may be described in one word: altruism. The dictionary defines altruism as regard for and devotion to the interest of others. The Samaritan was good because he made concern for others the first law of his life. This perspective adds to the framework of the Black pastor, emphasizing the idea of collective and communal concern. Lyon states, there is an African proverb that states, if a child doesn't feel the embrace of a village, it will burn it down to feel its warmth. Black pastors must help, in the words of Smokey Bear, prevent forest fires by ensuring the embrace of the community is felt by everyone, preventing anyone from feeling the need to burn down the village to experience warmth. Lyons also describes three characteristics of a healthy community. A healthy community takes your healing personally. Healthy communities will break down barriers to ensure that you receive the help you need, and healthy communities recognize that the best thing they can do for you is take you to Jesus. The Black pastor has the responsibility to care for the community they serve, ensuring that their communal concern is demonstrated and that their altruism is experienced. The pastoral framework now extends based on the three types of altruism that Dr. King mentions. First, King says that the Samaritan had the capacity for a universal altruism. He had a piercing insight into that which is beyond the external accident of race, religion, and nationality. One of the great tragedies of man's long trek along the highways of history has been the limiting of neighborly concern to tribe, race, class, or nation. If altruism is the devotion to the interest of others, King asserts that a good man, a godly man, a Black pastor must possess a broader scope of community and care, ensuring that all are cared for, regardless of their social or societal limitations. Dr. King suggests that the Black pastor must be willing to engage in the dirty places, to be with, as Emmanuel, their people, those who need the most. The second major construct of this pastoral framework, based on King's The Strength of Love, is that the Samaritan possessed the capacity for dangerous altruism. He risked his life to save a brother. The researcher believed that the Black pastor must see the lives of others as worthy of saving, even at their personal expense. The Samaritan recognized the fallen condition of the man as one that mirrored his own value and was worth inspecting and assisting. This perspective is crucial in Black pastoral ministry. Harris notes the Black church is not exempt from this criticism because there is a tendency among clergy and laity to be superficial and flamboyant. Few Black ministers on radio and television are preaching liberation messages, urging the church to be active agents of social change, opposing morally wrong and insensitive policies of government and industry. This radical approach may mean that preachers will have to sacrifice popularity, acceptability, and personal success for the good of the Black community as a whole. This reduction of status and sacrifice of self is the necessary stance that the Black pastor should take. Yet King calls it dangerous. Is it dangerous to refrain from flaunting wealth acquired on the backs of congregations while they struggle to make ends meet? Is it dangerous to empathize with those in need, to walk alongside them in their conditions? Is it indeed dangerous to challenge traditional teachings on tithing and giving if they support a system that drains the congregation without replenishing them? King asserts that while it is dangerous, it is the desired behavior of the Black pastor, taking risks, stepping out of the box, and embracing transformation that ultimately leads to life-saving outcomes. The final aspect of pastoral care, as framed and suggested by King, is that the Samaritan also possessed excessive altruism. With his own hands, he bound the wounds of the man and set him on his own beast. Another expression of the excessive altruism on the part of the Samaritan was his willingness to go far beyond the call of duty. After tending to the man's wounds, he put him on his beast and carried him to an inn and left money for his care, making clear that if further financial needs arose, he would gladly meet them. King emphasizes that the Black pastor should never settle for doing the bare minimum, nor should they seek to check off a box for appearances or just simply show up for a photo op. Instead, they should strive to model the extravagant love that God shows. Jesus illustrates this in John 3:16. For God so loved the world extravagantly that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever extravagantly believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Extravagantly. This model of excessive love must flow from the Black pastor to the sheep they care for, ensuring that congregants know how deeply they are loved and cared for. So today, we leave behind the hollow God talk. We choose the walk. We walk with those in pain. We walk toward justice. We walk in truth. We walk with a limp, but still we lead. As James Cone put it, the gospel reminds us that God snatches victory out of defeat, life out of death, and hope out of despair. This is good God walk. This is pastoral leadership. Next time, we'll explore fellowship on the native drum, how to walk with your people under leadership and through collective liberation. Until then, keep your head high, your feet grounded, and your spirit open. This is Native Drums, and the rhythm is still beating.